Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats Solo Summer Edition. It is I, producer JL, coming at you again with another summer solo episode. That's just what I decided to name it right now, but it's been that way all summer. But yes, producer JL here again. Just gonna, try and see if we could talk some Rangers hockey for a little bit. Not much has gone on. It's the end of August. Baseball's beginning to wind down in its final stretch run of September. The National Football League is gearing up to start their season, and that can only mean one thing. Ice is beginning to freeze in different parts of the country because training camp is about to begin sooner rather than later. And that, my friends, is a very welcoming sight. Or sound, if, you want to listen to the sound of ice. But so we here at Live in the Blue Seats, at least on this week, there really isn't much to touch on, although something did happen in Rangerland earlier this week, or not too long ago. So as we all know, Benoit Allaire has essentially taken a step back. He's been with the organization for, a very long time, and he's decided to scale back his efforts in terms of, his contribution to the organization. So it has been decided that the Rangers have promoted Jeff Malcolm to replace Benny as the goalie coach. He's been with the Rangers for the past 6 years, and he's finally going to get the call to become the main guy. Benoit Allaire has been here forever. He's, kind of scaled back some of his duties after his 20th year, but Allaire will still remain as the team's director of goaltending, while Malcolm will end up doing the day-to-day duties with the team. Just from looking at some things about him, he spent most of his time in Hartford and essentially worked closely with Allaire in Hartford while Benny was taking care of the NHL team. Malcolm seemed like he was more in tune with the minor leaguers there. And also, there were certain times when Allaire was on a medical leave. Malcolm did fill in for him. So I'll say this, and just a couple more things about him. He was with the Rangers organization as a player from 2013 and 2014, 2016 and 2017, and he also led Yale to a national title in 2012, 2013. So now and then, to replace him in Hartford is Brendan Burke, the son of former NHL goalie Sean Burke. So now, I know people are kind of worried, because this is essentially, not Benoit Allaire. We've seen Benny Allaire basically take some of the league's, best goaltenders and turned them into mega superstars. And he's also taken, seemingly average goaltenders and really unlocked their, potential. You can just go off on some of the names, Martin Biron, Cam Talbot, Alexander Georgiev, Igor Shesterkin, Henrik Lundqvist. You can sit here and Jonathan Quick had his whole basically career revived with the New York Rangers last season under Allaire's tutelage. So obviously Allaire's up there in age, and we've seen the work that he's done on some of the players that I just named. And so I'll say this. If Benny Allaire is going to vouch for the guy and he's already been in the organization within some capacity, then it's okay. Benny's not going to be here forever. And I know there's this weird thing in sports where it's like we always kind of forget that age and time are a thing, because I know myself included and a lot of people tend to kind of get lost in sort of just the circus of it all. And we tend to forget that, I mean, we age, but sometimes we don't think what we see on screen ages. That's just a thing. At least that's what I've, been able to collect about myself, at least. And I'm sure the sentiment is shared in some form or another with other people. But it's crazy to think that 20 years plus has gone by and we've essentially had a goalie coach who has not only revived the careers of many, but turned the elite talent into superstars that have led this team to, the highest of the high, sans winning a Stanley Cup. We saw what he did with Henrik Lundqvist. We saw what he did with Igor Shesterkin. And even, like I said, Alexander Georgiev. A lot of these guys come up, they look a little bit rough around the edges in certain instances. And Benny comes in and he puts his magic on it. Or even when the goaltender is a lead and they have some sort of issues, they fix it right up and then they end up becoming better. Henrik Lundqvist had, wasn't perfect at the beginning. Obviously, he clearly had the talent for it, but you can see how Benny, tweaked and changed certain things that he did, and it turned him into, arguably the greatest goaltender in Rangers history. And the same thing with Igor. I mean, look at what happened just this past January. Igor was struggling, end of December, early January. The team was kind of floundering, giving up a lot of leads. Goaltending wasn't that great outside of Jonathan Quick. And they managed it properly. And Igor ended up basically being, the backstop we needed him to be for the playoff run. So if they're that confident that Jeff Malcolm is going to come in and is going to, be the guy, then you know what? That's okay. I'm not one to sit here and kiss the organization's feet on everything that they do. But I do know that people online that I've seen were very worried that Benny not being involved in the day-to-day is essentially going to hurt, the operations of, the goaltending. But Benny's not leaving the organization, and, it's just a different person doing it day to day. And if Benny's still here, then it's still pretty good. And even if Benny does leave, because I'm sure he wants to retire at some point, then we just have to trust the fact that whatever Jeff Malcolm learned under him, that same wisdom can be imparted onto, some of the new guys coming up. Because, we're spoiled as Ranger fans. We really are spoiled. We've been blessed with such great goaltending since 2004, essentially. And with the nervousness that a lot of Ranger fans have with just, these big changes over the last couple of years, whether it was the firings of Gordon Davidson and, the team, making the playoffs, losing in the first round, and then, essentially not making it to the final this year. I could certainly understand why people would feel trepidatious at the change of, little things here and there. But at the end of the day, we can't control it. Obviously, that's different than, judging the team on, certain things or whatever. They're not immune to it, of course. If a team needs to be rightly criticized, then they'll do it. But at the same time, there's a time and a place on whether you want to worry about this or worry about that. And look, I don't know who I vaguely remember the name Jeff Malcolm, because I'm kind of a nerd and I used to, I'd looked at everyone that was in the organization, so that name does kind of pop into my head. But, you didn't really pay much attention to the goaltenders at the time because your top two goaltenders in the organization, aka Henrik Lundqvist and NHL backup one, were essentially just the only things you needed to worry about when Malcolm was a Ranger, at least when he was in the organization. So, so I don't really have much to say about that, except it's just, you just kind of have to see what happens. Benny's still in the organization. He's still going to oversee certain things, but I'm very curious to see what happens with this new coach coming in. It's kind of similar. Maybe this will end up paying dividends, because the Rangers made a huge change, bringing in when Laviolette came in, and they essentially they got rid of Mark Ciaccio, the quote unquote skills coach, and I use that term very loosely. And they brought in Christian Hamura, and it's no coincidence that the team just, at least, skill wise, when it came to just the overall skill that players ended up having, aka Alexis Lafreniere, really kind of changed. So maybe this is kind of the same thing. Not that anything's going to drastically change, but maybe, just maybe, Jeff Malcolm might be able to continue exactly what Benoit Allaire can bring forth. And, I don't know how it is with other fans of teams or how other teams' fans see their personnel, but I know for a fact that Rangers fans, at least, you know, the diehard ones, are the ones who pay really close attention, really care for, or really understand and appreciate a lot of the people behind the scenes. I mean, you know, everybody loved and appreciated Jim Ramsey for a very long time. Or, they knew him on a, whole name basis. You don't really know the coaches or the staff behind the scenes that well, because they're not really exposed. And the same thing also goes for a guy like Cass Marks, the equipment manager. You know, the Rangers seem to treat a lot of their people very well. The fans seem to appreciate what those people do for the players, and in turn, that ends up coming out on the ice, and we all end up appreciating it at the end of the day. The more that we've gone into, I guess, more, information being, given to us, and, the scrutiny has begun to kind of trickle towards coaching. For years, I would probably bet that years ago when Tom Rennie was the coach, I highly doubt that many people could name, the assistant coaches on the team. I only can really think of one at the time, and it was Perry Pern. I don't remember the name of the other coach. Then again, I'm a giant nerd, so I mean, I kind of knew it, but I highly doubt that if I were to go and say, hey, do you know who John Tortorella's assistant coaches were at one time? You would think, what, Mike Sullivan, Jeff Bukaboom, Ulf Samuelson? That's about it. Maybe Scott Arniel with Alain Vigneault, Lindy Ruff. Well, that was an obvious one, but the point I'm trying to make is that now, at least in this digital age that we're in, we as fans, understand the impact that coaching has on players, especially with the whole Gerard Gallant fiasco. And we see what it's done and what it can do for, the talent on this roster. So when it comes to the goaltending, I mean, consistently strong goaltending from your starters and backups, regardless of who they are, obviously you're going to remember who the goalie coach is, and that's Benoit Allaire. Now it's Jeff Malcolm. So, at the end of the day, we're just going to have to try and just give it a shot. And I'm not going to sit here and just rant about it forever. It's just, that's something that happened in Rangers news. And, I just think, let's give the guy a shot. Benoit Allaire still in the organization. Let's see what happens. So now it's August 23rd when I record this. And again, been very quiet on the home front outside of a lot of what's gone on. And September's going to come around. Training camp's going to kind of crawl its way back in. Some teams are, already having some people come on the ice here and there. And so, expectations for the year, just very preliminary. Of course, we're probably going to have, once the fall kicks in, and, once Rob and Dave and, Becky and the rest of the crew come back in, we're going to, we'll get into that a little more, more in depth. But, right now, excuse me. So right now, just kind of preliminary thoughts. I was having a conversation with a couple of people the other day. I was on vacation, and I'm friends with one of our contributors, Russell. He's the one that geared me towards this blog, and I'm grateful to that. And we're having a conversation about just the team in general, and it just kind of feels like this team's kind of stuck, but also they're not going to be as bad as people put them out to be. And so that got me thinking, like, normally I generally tend to have this sort of expectation on what the season could turn out to be, I thought before last season, I didn't think President's Trophy. I really never think President's Trophy because I would never anticipate my team ever being that good off the bat. But I anticipated a better effort, better season from certain players. And, I kind of had an idea that the team would be better than they were than with Gerard Gallant because Peter Laviolette's system is way more intense in terms of digging in deep, way more intense in terms of, moving the puck around and being diligent in your offensive zone and being responsible on defense. So, and then obviously, you see the coaching changes, with Michael Pekka, Phil Housley, Christian Hamura, Dan Muse, who are guys who we would envy on other teams. So my expectation was, of course, it's going to be better. And then especially being there for game 1 in Buffalo, you could see it was, I mean, goodness gracious, So, this has probably been, I probably mentioned this on previous podcasts, but so the team itself, I don't know what to expect. I honestly really don't, because there are a lot of question marks up in the air. I'm not to say that this is a bad thing, not to say that they're going to completely fall off a cliff this year, but the team is still very good. I'll just say that. The team is still very talented. You could make a case that the defense might be a little thin depending on how you see the pieces that they've acquired, but at the same time, there's still elite offensive talent. Alexis Lafreniere has basically come into his own, and the Rangers they haven't traded him yet, so they're clearly looking to give Capo Caco one final chance. I'd say, this is probably his make it or break it year. And then you have guys like Brennan Othman and Brett Berard. Now, I think about those two whenever it comes to hockey. Whenever I think about hockey, I think about those two way more than I need to, because I feel as if they're going to be the difference makers. We know what we're going to get in Lafreniere. We know what we're going to get with Trocheck, Panarin, Kreider, Cooley. We know what we're going to get from those guys. Philip Hedl, we know what we can expect from him as long as he stays healthy and he's able to, not only stay healthy but also protect himself from concussions. And him being your third line center, it's a perfect situation. So we know what that's going to be. But then, what's going to happen with Riley Smith? Where do the Othman and Berard make the team? Where do you put them? Then you think about the fourth line. You think, okay, well, we still have Jimmy Vesey. We still have Matt Rempe. Sam Carrick has come in and essentially replacing Goodrow as the fourth line center. Like I said, Rempe. You also have Adam Edstrom, too. So there's a lot to kind of put in. Now, we'll probably have a better idea once camp starts and once they start playing like actual hockey. I might get an idea, but just thinking off the top of my head, it's not as, how do you say, black and white, so to speak. And I think that's honestly done on purpose. Truth be told, now that the more that I think about it, the more that I think that this is by design. Obviously it's probably not ideal considering the cap restraints that they have and the, Jacob Trouba's unwillingness to essentially be traded, because I think personally, I think Drury, with how quick he was able to get rid of Goodrow and how swift and how, it kind of did screw him over a little bit. You already know that he had wanted to send Trouba out there, and you knew, and just judging off of who Detroit signed in the offseason, including guys like Tarasenko, Patrick Kane, Eric Gustafson, that they're essentially trying to build, I don't want to say they're building a direct thing of the Rangers, but, these guys saw that they did reasonably well for the team. Obviously, Tarasenko just won a cup with the Panthers, so you bring in a guy in like Trouba who has played with those guys before, would have benefited them very well. Obviously, we know the story about what happened to Trouba putting Detroit on his no-trade list, even though he's from there, so I think that really hampered the team. And I think if Drury had traded Trouba, I think if Drury had decided to move him, or he was able to move him rather, then I think the Rangers make a bunch of different moves. Again, I was chatting with Russell. We were hanging out on the beach in Virginia, and he had mentioned to me that the only move that he probably thought the Rangers should have made was for Jonathan Marchessault, to which I, didn't exactly disagree with. I think Jonathan Marchessault would have been really good with players like Kreider and Zibanejad. It just all came down to money. I think if they had traded Trouba, they don't trade for Riley Smith. They actually go and they sign one of those guys, because then I think what would have happened is they probably would have been able to make a trade or maybe utilize some assets to go trade for another defenseman. But even so, right? You look at the forward lines. Riley Smith should complement Kreider and Zibanejad well. I feel like I've talked about this way too many times, and I've had to try and justify it because I'm in the camp that if I don't know or I can't tell the results because, clearly nothing's happened yet, I'm not going to sit there and slam the move, because at the end of the day, it just might end up working out. A lot of these depth signings that the Rangers ended up signing that people didn't think would be great ended up turning out to be okay. Even uses a guy like Ben Harper as an example. Everybody thought that Ben Harper was going to just be absolute dog crap. And I'm not saying Ben Harper is essentially this elite defenseman, but, you know, outside of a couple of suspect plays here and there, I mean, he wasn't the worst. I've seen terrible defensemen play for this team. It's not like we, put Rob O'Gara out there. Ben Harper actually has an impact on the team to a degree with his physicality, so I'm not trying to say that I'm going to kiss the boot of everything that the Rangers do, or that everything that they do is going to be great, because they've certainly made their fair share of decisions that I do not agree with or I didn't exactly see as proper. I mean, I thought the deadline was good. I think Jack Roslovic was a good asset to trade for, but I mean, now that I think about it, I'm a little, I don't want to say too disappointed by it, but I mean, maybe they could have probably gotten something different. It would have been interesting to see them get Barabanov from San Jose. I mean, I wonder how that would have went, but either way, they're not prone to criticism, but also you have to give it a chance. And Riley Smith, from just having watched him just torch the Rangers for years on the Panthers and on the Vegas Golden Knights, the Rangers always seem to do well with that, though, for some reason. If you think about it, they always bring in these guys who have hurt them, and they somehow end up doing really well. I mean, I could have only imagined what would have happened if the Rangers had ever signed Blake Como at one point. Because that dude was always scoring against us, whether he was an Islander or played with the Dallas Stars, whomever, Colorado, whoever Blake Como played for, he always ended up scoring against us. It's also similar to Jeff Skinner. For a distinct period of time, around the first year he signed with Buffalo and his time in Carolina, Jeff Skinner was always finding a way to score against us and put that puck in the back of the net. So, which is why I thought, well, Jeff Skinner becomes a Ranger. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but, it is what it is at this point. So, yeah. So it just, and then we were talking about the defense. I was talking about the defense with somebody, and I think this is the year that Matthew Robertson finally gets his look. Because now with Eric Gustafsson gone, you essentially have Zach Jones to take that spot. And rightly so. Because with Ryan Lindgren having been brought back for 1 year, the team clearly does not want to commit to Lindgren long term. They want to see what happens, which is a completely fair assessment, just considering the type of player that he is. So the deep pairs would presumably be Fox and Lindgren, and then it would be Schneider and Miller, which proven to be absolutely fantastic. And then you have to deal with Jacob Trouba on the third pair and Zach Jones. And then your two spares are Chad Ruhwedel and Matthew Robertson. So Chad Ruhwedel, I thought, should have gotten more playing time, and I think he should have gotten a chance in the playoffs. I mean, I'm glad that he's going to be back for a year, so maybe we get to see a little bit more. Hopefully, he can be a valuable asset. But, it's your top six is probably just as good as it will ever be, at least in this current moment, right? And there's still two guys in the Rangers system who need a little bit more seasoning. Obviously, EJ Emery, just drafted this year. He's definitely a raw talent, but he's the defensive version of Keandre Miller, which I think would, I have a feeling they're going to end up being paired up at some point down the line if Key ends up being here long term. And then, you have Drew Fortescue, who has played with Gabriel Perreault, if I'm remembering that correctly, at BC. Or is it BU? I think it's. Now I have to look this up because I have to be right about this. It's Gabriel. I just want to make sure that I get that right because I don't want to mess that up. Gabriel Perreault, son of Yannick Perreault. Yannick Perreault, very good, a very good hockey player. So it was BC. Okay, just want to make sure because those colleges tend to kind of meld together for me. But, Drew Fortescue and Gabriel Perreault. That's another one who's, going to be here and just be absolutely kill it. But that's another podcast for another day. So you have guys like EJ Emery, Drew Fortescue, and, a couple of other guys in the minors who, could essentially make an impact. So while there are not many flashy names, in terms of the depth is still there. And the team is still set up really well. Obviously, and the big thing is that we need Zibanejad to show up. Now, I don't know what the hell happened last year and why he was so odd. Okay, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. And I don't know if I've expressed this in other podcasts in depth. Maybe I have. But the biggest, and I probably have, now that I think about it, I have. And if I haven't and you've known that I haven't, then by all means correct me. But the big thing with this team is not going to be Panarin because we know he can score in the regular season. That's not a problem. We know Kreider's going to be good. We know Lafreniere and Trocheck are going to be fine. Capo Caco was up in the air, but the difference maker with this team is Mika Zibanejad. This team would have been so much better and would have, granted, Zibanejad led the team in points in playoffs, playoff points, the first two rounds last playoffs, but he vanished. Nowhere to be found. Granted, Alexander Barkov is a tremendous defensive center, and maybe Mika was hurt because he did take a mean cross check to the lower back against the Hurricanes and Brent Burns. So maybe that kind of shifted things because Mika was very noticeable those first two series. But either way, there were moments throughout the season. I think he had under 10 even strength goals last year or last season. So it is a bit concerning, that your top center, who is getting, the guy you're paying to be your top center, is essentially a power play merchant. Obviously they're able to really get away with a lot because Lafreniere and Panarin just having monster seasons and Vincent Trocheck, which is, helping the cause. But, Zibanejad's going to be the difference maker. He is 100%. Has to be, and we know, and the frustrating part about Mika is that, he has it in him. We've seen it happen before where he can just utterly take over a game and just will his way in. And whether it's a condition thing, or maybe he just doesn't vibe with Laviolette, I don't know. But that's the most shocking part. And that's what I'm getting at is, the team is good. The team is talented. But at the end of the day, we need Mika Zibanejad to be the guy. And I know I'm probably repeating myself, but it's, again, worth mentioning relative to what's happened and why the team is in the position that they are right now, is they need Mika to be the guy. Because if Mika becomes the guy, Kreider gets a boost, Riley Smith gets a boost, the other lines get a boost because they get to continue to do the things that they do, especially a guy like Philip Hedl, who's probably going to get third line minutes with Cooley, and insert winger either Berard, Othman, or VC there. And that's really going to be the difference because then if you look at the center depth, you have Trocheck, Zibanejad, Hedl. And if you can have that number, obviously we know that's going to be the second line now. Kreider's Zibanejad, that's not line one anymore. We all know that. So if they can do that, then they're golden. How Zibanejad's going to take this summer, whether it's a conditional thing, whether it's a mental thing, whether he just needed to get away from everything or whatever, or he just needed to get acclimated to having a kid and all this and that and the fourth, who knows? There's a lot of things that happen in a hockey player's life, and it's definitely not the easiest thing. Not to say that they have hard, like they're down on the count, but they're humans too, and stuff happens. So maybe this summer could be good for Mika, but he's the difference maker. And so I think with the lack of moves that the Rangers have made relative to other teams, I think they feel that the group that they're throwing out there, they're confident enough. And then also, you can always add at the deadline. The Rangers, I didn't mind the deadline moves that they made, but it's been very hit or miss in certain aspects. But either way, it's always still an option, So I just think that's a big part of why the team didn't do much. And rightly so. I mean, those prices were absolutely exorbitant, for some of those players. As much as I like Steven Stamkos, I am not giving him the contract that Nashville gave him. Nashville has the money to do that. They have the capital to go and sign a guy like that, So it just gets to a point where you just kind of have to roll with some of the young guys. And this is what I was telling somebody else too. For years, just relative to why the Rangers haven't done much. For years, we've trotted out, looked at some of these just awful prospects. And, no disrespect to them, it's just the Rangers were always on the short end of the stick when it came to prospects and kids coming up. Maybe this is going to be the time where some of these guys are going to step in and the team ends up going to another level. Look at Tampa Bay. Look at Boston. Look at Colorado. They've got players coming up and filling in. So what do? For years, this fan base had been clamoring for kids to get the playing time. You want to play the kids. Kakko and Lafreniere get minutes. The Rangers are more than likely going to do that with Othman and Berard. And the organization seems to value both those guys enough where they didn't trade any of them for Jake Gensel. And honestly, rightly so that they did that, because as much as I think Jake Gensel would have been okay, Jake Gensel didn't fix the problem of the team not being able to break out of their own zone defensively. Might have he scored one or two more goals? Maybe. But if it made much of a difference? Probably not. But again, that contract he got, that extension he got from Carolina, is absolutely ridiculous. But either way, so because they didn't trade those prospects for them, and they didn't do anything with them this whole summer, well, looks like they're going to come into camp and they're going to be the guys to essentially try to earn a spot, So I believe that Chris Drury is trying to let some of his young guys kind of come through, I mean, they essentially threw out Adam Edstrom and Matt Rempe out there at one point, so we at least know that the organization is clearly committed to try and getting some of these kids in. So again, really, the summer has brought us a little action, but if you go outside right at 8 o'clock or right before 8 o'clock, it's getting dark. So that just goes to show you we're only one couple of steps away from hockey. And it's also been really chilly outside. Contemplated wearing a Rangers jersey for the first time in a couple of months. If it keeps being chilly like that, honestly, I'll take it. But it's a nice little reminder that hockey is coming soon. So hockey coming soon, that means we're going to have more content. Obviously this summer, we don't really do much. These kind of just come more of just trying to, just kind of talk hockey and discuss some of the moves that have gone on, that we, haven't really been around to cover. And, as the summer ends and the fall comes, we'll have more coverage on here. We'll get the whole gang back. We'll have questions. We'll maybe play a couple of goofy games here and there. Just get our thoughts. It's just our little break, and I'm glad that if you're listening to this, you've taken the time out to listen to my quasi incoherent rambling. But we'll be back definitely stronger and ready to go once the fall comes around. And I know it'll really be coming out strong once the preseason starts, which end of September, can't wait. So there's that. So anyways, I guess really, what else is there to talk about? Unless something drastic happens, then maybe we'll get another retrospective episode next week. I'm currently looking to try and see who I can exactly profile. I've tried to do a little bit more player goal videos. I have a list of a ton of people that I want to get to. But obviously the summer is a different animal, so to speak, and people are busy. I'm definitely a lot busier than I originally anticipated. But I'm more than likely I'm thinking between either Peter Nedved or Brendan Shanahan. And again, while I do write about current things for the website, I mentioned this before, I like to delve into the the kind of the nostalgia, going into the past. What's the cool thing? The cool thing about sports is that you can look back at those days fondly, even if the teams weren't that good. I mean, Peter Nedved was a phenomenal hockey player, and the Rangers, as I mentioned once before, in a podcast where they've jeopardized a lot of the future for the sake of Mark Messier, and bringing back Peter Nedved the second time was probably a part of that. But that was actually a good move because Peter Nedved was good. Although a lot of people I know who watched the Rangers, I mean, I did pay attention back in the day. I never really got much of a grip on it because I was young. It's the same thing with everything that I watched back in the day. I don't really remember it much, but I do remember watching it and remember paying attention. But they said that Nedved had all this skill in the world and he kind of like moseyed around a little bit. But if you watch a lot of those older games, which when I began to find them online, I actually have a whole bunch of them from some YouTube channels that I follow, that I put them on my tablet. So when I go flying and I need something to just have either in my ear playing or essentially, just watch on like an hour or 2 hour flight, I have a bunch of old hockey games. I have, a lot of games from the late 90s, early 2000s with just some of those teams just absolutely incredibly bad. But it's interesting to just see the talent that sticks out and some of the players that came out. And Nedved's one of those, and then I think they had something cooking at the end of 2004 when they had Yager, Leach, Nedved, Messier, and a healthy Lindros, before he only played a couple of games that year and was essentially out of commission. But I mean, I think they were cooking with something at one point. They just, the injuries, and they just could not make it over the finish line. And then obviously we saw the switch of what happened after the lockout. They kept Yager, Leach got traded, Nedved didn't come back, Lindros didn't come back, Bure retired. Oh, they even had, somewhat Pavel Bure at some point, Darren Fleury too. So what am I getting at? Retrospectives, looking at players, going back in time. So I hope you check the chance out to watch him. I just did a Michael Nylander retrospective. I know I mentioned this again. I know I'm mentioning it again, but I do have a Michael Nylander sort of retrospective of most of the goals that he scored with the Rangers. So if you want to check that out, it's on my YouTube channel. But maybe Brendan Shanahan. He was only here 2 years, but was probably one of the more impactful players. A lot of those players in 2005 up until like 2008, I think those were like the kind of the fire starters, so to speak. I really did like Brendan Shanahan here. He was one of my favorites. He, is one of my favorite players. And I thought he complemented this team well, even though he wasn't the same guy that he was in Detroit. He was still pretty damn good for the most part. So I consider him to be like one of those fire starters because of how the team was not in the playoffs. And then prior to him coming, they got swept in the first round by the Devils. And then he comes in and the team is just way more lethal. And then you look at guys like Peter Sikora and Steve Ruchin and Peter Pruka, even like Nigel Dawes. These guys, they were decent hockey players and, some more so than others helped out. But it's always interesting to go back and look back at that, and I like to do that. But anyways, um, I won't sit here and continue to ramble on much longer. Thank you very much for taking the time out to listen this summer production of Live from the Blue Seats, and I hope that you have a wonderful summer, and I will see you all next week here on Live from the Blue Seats. You have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening whenever you're listening to this, and let's go Rangers.